Hello, folks, and welcome to another episode of the Dr. Mark Foster Show. Today I want to talk about George Floyd and some of the issues related to the assassination of George Floyd by police officers in Minneapolis, Minnesota. There have been uprisings, demonstrations throughout the United States, quite justifiable in my view. The American police system, like police systems everywhere, is a very corrupt system, and particularly in the United States, it is riddled with racism. It has always been riddled with racism, going back to the age of the slave plantations in the United States, and before there was a United States. That is the legacy of policing in the United States. It is a corrupt, racist, white supremacist system which tolerates abuses of power, abuses of privilege by those who occupy a position that most people will never occupy, the ability to use a gun to arrest somebody and take them into custody. And when we look at the broad picture of policing in the United States, we see that African Americans, both female and male, are disproportionately oppressed by the police in the United States. It is a totally intolerable situation in my view. I've always had a very strong distaste for the way in which policing works in the U.S., where some people like me, for example, are treated as privileged and other people are not. It is a system which, in my view, needs to be totally deconstructed, demolished, and destroyed. It is not a system which can be reformed. Once in a while, I will listen to a police officer, frequently a chief of police, on some television show talk about this thing that they refer to as community policing. What they mean by that is that police departments need to become more actively engaged in the communities which they police. So, for example, going back to the idea of the Police Athletic League, I'm not even sure if that even exists anymore, where police get to know the members of their community. Perhaps police officers are on a first name with the members of their community. In some cases, there are requirements that police officers need to live in that community, or at least live nearby, and cannot live, as is the case in Minnesota, outside the city limits, where the vast majority of police in Minneapolis do not live in Minneapolis. In that case, there is no empathy. There is no understanding. The African American, the Latino, and other minorities simply become the marginalized other, or as Antonio Gramsci called them, the subaltern, the people without any power at all. And with respect to policing in the United States, by and large, African Americans in particular, but black and brown people more generally, have historically had little or no power. It is really an intolerable situation and needs to be remedied. So what do we do? Well, George Floyd was killed. Today, The police officer who actually killed him was charged with third-degree murder. Why not second-degree murder at least? I have no idea, but with third-degree murder. Other charges may come later. The police officers who were working with him have so far not been charged. That may change in the coming days or weeks. If an average person, someone who was not a police officer, did the kind of thing that that police officer did, that person would have been arrested immediately and forced to do a perp walk. As far as I know, there has been no perp walk by that police officer who has been arrested, or if there has been one, it was done secretly or in the dead of night where no one could witness it. There is no evidence that there was such a perp walk. In fact, I don't even know if that person is even in custody. For all I know, he might have been bailed out. I don't know. I guess we'll find out in the coming days and hours. Regardless, what do I mean by the destruction of modern-day policing? Well, as a communist, I believe that everything, whether it's police, business, the economy, political institutions, all the major institutions of society should be run by the people, should be run by the proletariat or the workers. The workers should be the ones who have control over all aspects of society with literally no exception. The people in power should be the people who have no power right now. In other words, society needs to be inverted so that the police, for example, become immediately accountable to the citizens they serve. Not through community policing, in other words, but through community-run policing, where the communities actually run the police. I am a big supporter of unionization. I come from a union family. Both my mother and my father were members of unions. I happen to be a member of the largest union in the United States, the National Education Association, the higher education division of the National Education Association, to be more precise. I believe that everyone, with only one exception, has the right to demand a union. That one exception is the police. I don't think that police officers should have a right to be unionized. I think that police should be immediately accountable to the people in the community, that if a police officer misbehaves, does anything which members of the community regard as being unjust or intolerable for any reason, the community should have the right to vote on whether that police officer should be terminated. And then that police officer should have no recourse. The police officer cannot appeal it. The police officer from that point forward will never again be allowed to be a police officer anywhere. The idea that exists commonly among a lot of people I speak with, including some of my students, is that police are kind of special, and therefore you need to give police a certain degree of latitude. because they are, after all, police officers. My view is the direct opposite of that. I think that police should be expected to be the best of us. Police should be held to a higher standard of conduct than the average citizen. People who argue the other way are in effect saying that no, police should be held to a lower standard. So, in other words, the criterion for whether to fire a police officer, for whether to criminally charge a police officer, and for whether to convict a police officer in a court of law, that criteria should be much lower. Not higher, but lower. It should be much easier to convict, to charge, to arrest a police officer than to arrest an average citizen. Unfortunately, everything is so backwards in modern society that we see events like the one that happened earlier this week with George Floyd. And of course, George Floyd is not the beginning of this story. He will not be the end of this story. There will be other George Floyds, other people who are arrested and mistreated. I was watching CNN last night at about 4 a.m. Typically I'll watch MSNBC until it goes into repeats. Then I'll switch over to CNN because they generally broadcast over the entire night. And at about 4 a.m., an African American police officer was arrested, handcuffed, as were his camera crew and producers and security detail. They were all arrested and taken into custody and brought down to the police station. Meanwhile, there was a CNN reporter who was white a block away who was not bothered at all. He said that he actually had a good relationship with the police around him. They knew who he was, they knew what he was doing, and nothing happened to him at all. This black police officer was extraordinarily polite. He said, officers, I work for CNN. If you want us to move someplace else, just tell us and we'll move. He was extraordinarily polite and accommodating. Despite that, those pigs arrested him. Those pigs arrested him. And I don't use the word pigs as a synonym for cops. I only call cops pigs who are pigs. Cops who behave badly. Cops who are the embodiment of the oppressive police system. The fact that I detest policing in the United States does not mean that I detest all individual police officers. Of course not. I realize that there are some good police officers. I actually know some people who are good police officers. But those people who did what they did last night to that CNN reporter were pigs. Those people who killed George Floyd were pigs. And pigs should not have a right to be cops. They should be seen as the pigs they are, treated as such, and prevented from having any position of power or authority over the general public. So, as you can probably tell, I am very worked up about this. It's put me into a very distressed state. Whenever I see people who are oppressed, whether it's women or African Americans or Native Americans, or Latino Americans, whatever, being oppressed, my antenna go up, and I immediately feel that I need to do something to arise to defend them. Sadly, there's not much I can do. Here we are on a COVID-19 pandemic. I am at home. I go outside maybe once every week or two to pick up my mail and my prescriptions, and that's all. Otherwise, I stay home. I have no place to go. I'm off for the summer, and in the fall, when classes resume, I will be teaching all of my classes online. So I am one of the fortunate ones. But what that also means is that my contact with the public is very, very limited. And I feel a deep need in my heart to do something that will defend the rights of people like George Floyd. And yet, realistically, I am not able to do so. So, for me, making these podcasts, perhaps this episode in particular, is a way for me to get my frustrations out to some degree, to express my frustrations, and to hopefully do some good by bringing some awareness, some what Paulo Freire called conscientization, which is basically consciousness or awareness based on conscience. Conscientization is from the original Portuguese word, which is itself derived from the French word conscience, and the French word conscience, which is spelled like the English language conscience, can mean either conscience or consciousness. So conscientization is awakening the consciousness and the moral conscience of people, making people conscious of the fact that there are people around us who do not have the same rights as I do, who don't have the same privileges as I do, who are not regularly harassed by pigs. And therefore, I am among those people who are blessed. I recognize that I am blessed. I would gladly, and I'm being totally honest, I would gladly have sacrificed my life to help George Floyd, if I could have. If I could have. If I were there, if I were among the onlookers to that act of murder which took place in Minneapolis, I would have, because I know myself, I would have stepped forward and demanded that the police stop what they are doing. And if they did not, I would have physically intervened, even while recognizing that I might in the process get myself killed. Because that's who I am. That's just I'm not bragging, but that's just who I am. I've been like that since I was a child. I've always had a very strong sense of social justice and a great degree of intolerance for any kind of injustice, no matter where that injustice comes from. That concludes this broadcast of the Dr. Mark Foster Show. This is Mark, signing off. Have a good one.